Welcome to the Grow My Salon Business podcast, where we focus on the business side of hairdressing. I'm your host, Antony Whitaker, and I'll be talking to thought leaders in the hairdressing industry, discussing insightful, provocative, and inspiring ideas that matter. So get ready to learn, get ready to be challenged, get ready to be inspired, and most importantly, get ready to grow your salon business. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. I'm your host, Antony Whitaker, and it's great to have you here with us today. I get an enormous amount of enjoyment from all of my guests on the podcast, and I also learn a lot from them too. The best way to learn is to ask questions and to be prepared to question your own beliefs and attitudes, to be vulnerable, to listen, to be open, honest, tolerant, and to be prepared to broaden your own perspective, and above all, to be receptive to change. This year in particular, an area that I and many others have learned more about is the issues around race, and as hairdressers, the direct impact that has in terms of the training we get, the products we use, and the services we offer, particularly around textured hair. On today's podcast, my guest is the wonderful Mahogany Plautz, and amongst the many hats she wears is that of hairdresser, former suite owner, and a self-titled hair historian, an activist, and an educator for John Paul Mitchell Systems, as well as a mother and a wife and many other things. This episode was originally done as part of a series of live video recordings for Paul Mitchell, but I decided to repurpose it for the podcast as it's a great conversation. Originally, it went out on Facebook and YouTube, and so if you'd rather watch the video, just head on over to my YouTube channel at Grow My Salon Business and watch it there. Welcome, Mahogany.
Thank you so much, Antony. I'm so happy to be here.
Good. I've been practicing my Plautz several times, so I'm glad I got it right.
It was perfect. It was perfect. That was exactly how it's pronounced. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is a little, isn't it? Okay, so just to give the next 45 minutes or so some context, could you sort of introduce yourself by way of giving us your sort of 2-minute backstory about who you are, where you've come from, etc., and then we can sort of dig in and start talking about a very wide range of things that relate to you in your life as a hairdresser.
Absolutely. So, hi everybody. Let's see. I've been a hairdresser for about 22 years. And I think one of my favorite things about being a hairdresser is like the opportunities that I have to like hang out with so many different people, right? Like I absolutely get to get art and business and all of that, but it's like all rolled up in like how I spend time with people. And that to me, I think has been really important. So I started my career after I finished beauty school. I spent an entire year training under one stylist. So I really got the benefit of someone who had been doing hair for a long time. So I got the benefit of not just understanding how it is that we cut, color, and style, but like how to run a business and how to run my chair. And I think that that piece of it was really huge for me as I moved into then going on to rent my own chair, own my own suite, deciding to be an educator, doing my own types of education. It really helped me to have like agency over everything that was mine to do. I also am a mom. I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. They're both super weird and hilarious. And so like, it's a joy being their mom most days, I'll be honest, most days.
I can relate to that.
Right. So it's, I live in Minneapolis. And I think one of the things that I love about Minneapolis is like right now it's fall and it is gorgeous. Like we have so much green foliage and we love to like go out and hike and run around on bikes and roller skate. Fun fact about me, I used to be in the roller derby. So I used to like beat up other girls on roller skates, which was pretty fun. And I think that that's, I've never been one to just sit and chill. I'm always on the go. There's always something to do, whether it's traveling as an educator for Paul Mitchell or traveling with my family out to like remote islands in Canada. I think that, it's all about just like seizing life and having the fun that you can have and balancing out as much of your work and life as you possibly can. Balance is kind of a myth to me, but I feel like finding a good rhythm depending on where we are in our lives, I think is the most important piece. So I'm
Yeah,
excited.
I think cool. Okay. I think that's really important what you just said about balance. A lot of people talk about that, don't they? Life
Yeah.
balance. And is there such a thing? It's like, I think rhythm, finding the right rhythm that works for you is a good way to put that. So I'm intrigued about your story into hairdressing. What was that journey? How did you find yourself in this industry?
So, I mean, I've been in salons since I was very small. My Nana's best friend was a hairdresser. One of my mom's best friends was a hairdresser. And because my hair was a sort of an anomaly for my mom, she's a beautiful Scandinavian woman from northern Minnesota, from a town of about 800 people. So in the 1970s, when she had me, there was not a lot, there was no YouTube, there was no natural hair community, there was no like information for her to go to. So some of the struggles that my mom and I had with our hair ended up really becoming some great defining ways of how our relationship grew. But I think what it did too was it also made me very aware of like how I was treated when I went into certain salons. It made me very aware of like what the capabilities of my hair, like it felt really limiting. But so I think I ended up deciding to go to beauty school because I didn't want to feel that way anymore. I almost went to beauty school to find out how to take care of my own hair because we
Yeah.
didn't have, the same education that we have now, and we didn't have the same goals that we do now with reaching straight, wavy, curly, and extra curly hair, right? So for me, that was really the biggest why. And I enjoyed beauty school. I was a little bit older when I went to beauty school. I was like 23, not fresh out of high school or anything. So I had some goals in mind. So I think that going into beauty school with some goals of I was working in a salon as a receptionist, and I would stand behind the owner all the time and ask him. I'd be like, Steven, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And finally he just turned and he was like, go to school, dude. Just go to school. And so I did, and it was awesome. It was really cool. And when I finished up, I spent a whole year, like I said, spending that time working with him, but also working and learning about the other stylists in the chairs around me and seeing how they each developed their own personality. Like there was times, Antony, where there would be folks who would come in and I would know just from their haircut, like whose chair they sat in. So it was cool to see all the different personalities craft their own art in the same salon and have it be cohesive and cool and interesting, but like very much individual. So I feel really lucky about not only just the owner that I worked for, but like the entire community of salon. It was like my salon family was really special to me.
Yeah. Okay. Was it predominantly a black hair salon or predominantly a white hair salon or?
Yeah, predominantly it was a white salon. I was the only Black person who worked in that salon. And so there was some interesting, there was some really cool and really amazing things. I think one of the things that was awesome was that, when you're in beauty school, we really learn most of our hair cutting techniques and trainings and all that on straight hair. So
Yeah.
when I was coming in, I was able to build my clientele in this salon because I was really familiar with the textures that I was working on. But there was times where, people would call, I have a longtime friend and client, Katana, who has like the first time she called the salon, she was like, do you have anybody who can work with black hair? And the salon receptionist answered and she was like, yeah, we do blue, we do green, we do purple, like we do all the colors, browns, reds, all that. And she was like, nah, hang on. Like, do you have someone who can work with Black people's hair? And she was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, mahogany. And so it was awesome because, it turned a moment that can be a challenge for a lot of, Black women who are looking for stylists all over the world. Like when you are looking for a salon that you want to go to that is like maybe in your neighborhood, or maybe you've heard friends, love it and you want to be able to go there. Sometimes it can be intimidating to call and have to say, do you do black hair? Which I think is, that's another goal I see moving forward. There's so many
Yeah.
more salons who are looking for that education right now. So I think it's really beautiful that we're taking these moments and evolving them into like anyone should be able to go to any place and get their hair done in in most ways, like you should be able to get a cut, you should be able to get a color, you should be able to get a style. Now there's definitely specialty things like locks and braids and twists and protective styles and those types of things that may not be for every stylist. But I think, like if you're a cutter, you should be able to cut all the hair. And if you're a colorist, you should be able to color all the hair. And I think that that's something that has been really, like something that I have been navigating a lot, because most of the salons that I have worked in have been predominantly white salons. The salon that I work in now is pretty mixed, and I really love that because we get to see all different kind of cultures walking in and out of the salon, and that's really beautiful, and it can be really fun to be inspired by.
Yeah. That's a really interesting thing what you were just talking about then, because I know, especially in the last couple of years, there's been such a emphasis put on everyone should be able to do everything in terms of, different hair types, work with different hair types. And a client should be able to go into any salon and get, his or her hair done. And I want to throw a different perspective on that. I mean, I guess I agree, but at the same time, I sort of go, I'm not sure, because as a hairdresser, I'm a hairdresser, but I cut hair. I don't color hair. I've never colored hair. And some people will be shocked by that. I've never done bridal hair. I've never really put hair up. Now, a lot of this is my heritage, where I worked, where I came from, that was what those salons, Sassoon, was all about, that you either cut or you colored. At one point, they had cutters, colorists, and tinters, not permers, sorry. So you either cut, you colored, or you permed in the 70s. When I started there at the very end of the 70s, they merged the tinters and the permers became one thing. So you were a technician or you were a stylist. And it was so my training, my background was always about cutting hair. But interestingly, and this was in the very early 80s in London, at Sassoon, you had to present a selection of models before you could go onto the floor after you had your test, etc. And you had to show at least one black model, which was great. Okay. But here's the funny thing. You'll laugh about this, right? Every model, do you know what they were? Grace Jones, baby, coming down. Everyone was like Grace Jones, flat top. Do you know what I mean? From that sort of 80s look. And it was a really good discipline to work visually with hair because of that tight textured, afroed hair. And so everyone would just cut. You just had always, it was like, there's Grace Jones in the corner sort of thing. And it was good. But people were sort of pushed out of their comfort zone to do that. But I suppose what I'm saying to you is this. From a discrimination point of view, I totally agree. You should be able to go into any salon anywhere and get whatever you want. I totally get that. But if you compare it to like a restaurant, that's my favorite go-to analogy. It's like a restaurant does Mexican, or they do Italian, or they do French, or they do Vietnamese. They all do food like we all do hair. But if you go to a restaurant that does, French, Italian, Vietnamese, Spanish, and Greek food, I would probably leave really quickly, because it means that they're not a master of any of them. And so I often think about the hair context, and I want you to talk to me about this. I want you to think about hair in that context, because, I'm about specialization, and I know a lot of people are about specialization, but I totally get your background and where you come from. I mean, you mentioned your mum was Scandinavian, so fine, soft, probably dead straight hair. Yes. Your hair, yes, is fine and soft, but very, very sort of different, So I know that all your life, you've been exposed to a lot more diversity about working with different textures and stuff. So talk to me about what I just said about that, about specialization and whether I'm right, wrong, how does that fit in?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know that I would say you're right or you're wrong. I feel like perspectives are so unique, and I think that's what makes people, no matter where we come from, really special. And I think that's why I like to remain super open about these things. But from my perspective, I will say that I do think that, yes, it would be strange to have so many different like foods in a restaurant, but everybody's welcome to that restaurant, right? So like when I think about cutting, for example, if you are a cutter, like if that's your specialization, like if you cook Italian, like you better cook Italian, right? Like that is, it's not just one, it's not just spaghetti, like there's a lot of different aspects to those different, food ethnicities, right? Those food spaces. So I think when sometimes we can be limiting our own selves, I think one of the best things that happened, we did these really great trainings, these really great texture trainings within our top educator group with Paul Mitchell. And what was awesome was some of the feedback that we received from some of our stylists who had not had a lot of experience with tight curly hair was that by learning tight curly hair, like learning some of the styling techniques, some of the thought process and how you would weave a color differently based on the curl pattern, because the curl pattern grows out and up rather than just straight down and it falls differently. They actually were expanded, not just in curly hair, not just in coily hair, but they were expanded, and they felt that they better understood what their why behind why they were doing things with straighter and wavy hair too. So I think it's not necessarily about I think it really is just about expanding what you're already specializing in. So you're specializing in cut, you're specializing in color, you're specializing in style, but expanding that. Now, definitely, I think, I think I said this earlier, I think it's really important that we recognize that there are folks who are going to be, looking for specifically like Black salons. And I think that's absolutely, or Black stylists. And I think that is it. Absolutely wonderful thing, because that's just a community space. That's a safe space. That's a camaraderie space. That's like, it's a vibe, right? Like it's a whole vibe. But I think that also, limiting a customer, limiting a guest to like, you can only go to this sort of space. I mean, they say that, church and salons are the most segregated places here, at least in the United States, for sure. And I think we have room to grow. I don't think it's necessarily like a shame on us. I think it's really like what's our opportunity to grow? What's our opportunity to look at how we view our customers and how we view that base? And I think that for me, when I'm crafting a class, like I really like to look at, okay, so I'm going to teach this hair cutting style, but I want to teach it. I want to show you what are the adjustments. Like if I'm teaching a curly cut, what are the adjustments if they want to wear their hair straight? If I'm teaching a straight cut, what are the adjustments if their hair is wavy? What kind of, like, would you use a different wider tooth comb if it was curly? Would you use less tension? What's your elevation looking like? Because that's not just teaching you a new cool haircut. That's also teaching you like to expand your thought process on how you cut. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, no, good. I'm liking what you're saying. It's really interesting when you sort of take a big picture overview of humanity. In that, if you go back, I don't know, 100 years ago isn't very long, but go back 100 years ago, and it's funny enough, I was just thinking this when I was watching TV this morning. In London, looking at this particular guy who was running to become the mayor of some city, and he had a turban on, and I was saying to my wife, he's got an English accent, but he's like got a turban, and he was, I'm not sure where he was originally or where his family came from. I suppose what I'm saying to you is 100 years ago, you would never have seen that. And now the world has become a very diverse melting pot of people. So here's the interesting thing. If you take that the next stage and you go, well, wow, it's done that within 100 years. You're sort of an example of this, and your kids are an example of this, is that if you go back 100 years ago or 200 years ago, whatever it was, there was a lot more, you were Black or you were white. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the middle. And you look at America now, America is, well, the whole world is a great melting pot. So what will people look like in 100 years' time? Like as the average, do you know what I mean? Because there'll be less pure, I hate even using that term, but white
Yes.
and black. There'll be more of this sort of, you have to be so careful with the wording you use. There'll be more sort of diversity. And that brings me to a question, which I've gone completely off track with the things I was going to talk about with you. But I think that this is really interesting, because because you very consciously used the word texture before, talking about texture here. When does race, ethnicity turn into texture? Because it's sort of related to what I was just saying. Is that the more, like, you have naturally coily hair, I'm assuming that your kids do, but are maybe less so than you. You know, what does that look like as different generations sort of morph and etc. So the question I wanted to ask you is that, when is the point where it's not about race and ethnicity, that it is just about texture? Because of course I work with all sorts of textures of hair.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm trying to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely hit it when you say, like, it isn't necessarily about race. I mean, there's nuance to, like, you know, just language and you know, folks who are trying to attract different, you know, racial ethnicities into their salons. I'm here for it. Like, do that. Absolutely. But be mindful. You know, be mindful about that aspect. But when it comes to the technicalities of doing hair, it is about fine, medium, coarse, the texture. And it is about that formation. You know, is it straight? Is it wavy? Is it curly? Is it coily? How many different patterns do people have in their head?
Yeah.
You know, I think that piece is really the most important part. And that's the place where I feel like we can all kind of come together and really start to understand how servicing guests, because, you know, I think when we first launched, like, the curl products back way, you know, like a decade or so ago, we were talking about how the world is probably, I think, like 70% of it is wavy, curly, and tight curls, right? Like, that's what we were looking at. So that's 70% of the world. And I think we've all, because of trends and, you know, fashion and whatnot, we've all, like, I remember the 90s and trying to get my hair bone straight. Like, I wanted to have it look like I had no hair at all. I wanted it to be so close to my head, with my dark lip liner and my, you know, and my lip gloss, because I wanted to look just like the girls on the videos, right? Like, I wanted to look like Aaliyah. She was so cute. And so for me, that was that trend was really cool and awesome, but it also left me feeling like I had to put so much more work, so much more time, so much more energy, so much more money into making that trend. And so as we see these trends evolve, I think it's less about one specific look, where one specific texture. Like, we just taught a training, and it was awesome because we really used a lot of different textures within our fall trend report to showcase the color and the cut and, like, the inspirations that people were having from Italy, from Australia, from here in the US. And it was awesome because we could do each one of those cuts, colors, and styles on straight hair, wavy hair, curly hair, and coily hair. But it was just about the adjustment piece of it. So moving forward, I really do see a lot more education being focused on, like, a bob, you know, a chin length bob, a square chin length bob, but how do you adjust it for this, and this? And I think that will only benefit a hairdresser.
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you a question about that. Would you do that to your hair now?
Straighten my hair?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. So it's not like first of all, I love a relaxer. I'm not mad at relaxers. Do them well, do them right, keep your hair healthy. Like, people have choices, and I'm not mad at them. The reason that I wouldn't do it is because it's too much work for me. It's just too much work. Okay. And my husband told me that, you know, like, he's never had an opinion about my hair. I remember one time I left with short hair. I left the house with short hair and came home with like waist length green braids, and he didn't even notice. Like, he didn't. He was just like, hey, and I was like, you see something different here? And he was like, oh yeah, baby, your hair is really long and it's green. Wow, you look good. Like, so there's not a lot of, like, I don't get a lot of that. But the one we did talk, and I said, what's the one thing that you are just like, nah? And he's like, miss me with the straight hair. Like, it just, it doesn't suit me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't suit,
Yeah.
a lot of other people. I do silk presses in the salon. It's important that people have that versatility, because I think that it's about the individual. No matter what race you are, it is about that individual. And I think because it doesn't matter what race you are, you should be able to, express your hair in ways that make you feel like your best self, with
I agree.
and love for yourself. I think, and understanding how it's presented, you do have to make those choices for yourself. And I think it's something that we all deserve, for sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But I was reflecting, if that's the right word, on, why you did that as a kid, young person growing up. Would you do it now? Answer's no. And one of the things that you'll sometimes hear people talk about is like, here you are with your locks, and we'll talk about locks later on. And they look great. You look great with them. But if I had locks and I was walking down the street in certain parts of London, or certain parts of anywhere, I imagine, I would be confronted by someone saying that is cultural appropriation.
Absolutely.
That you shouldn't be doing that. And I get confused about that, because it's like what we just said. If I feel like I want locks because I think they look great, then that's what I want. And like, why is that cultural appropriation? Which I think it is.
Yeah, okay.
But straightening hair into a little bob for a black lady isn't. Like,
that's a good question.
Do you see what I mean? Like, and I don't care one way or the other. I just get a bit confused about that. I know I was talking to you once about a friend of mine here, a very good friend of mine, who's black. And if I say the wrong thing around her, I get my head ripped off. And this would be a great example of getting my head ripped off with this conversation. So I'm so, glad that you're so open to talking about that. So talk to me about that, because I love looking at a good silk press. I think it looks fantastic, So, what are your thoughts about what I've said there?
Well, I think that, we'll start with the locks first, first and foremost. I think when we think about locks, yes, they do show up in a lot of different cultures and they show up in a lot of different ways. But I think the challenge, and one of the things, part of the reason that I consider myself like a hair historian and activist, is because I've done a lot of research about where locks come from and how they've evolved, and specifically when it comes to Black people, because for sure in the United States, we have the Crown Act, right? And that is just really truly trying to put legislation in place for Black folks to not be discriminated against because of their hair. P.S. It's really sad that we have to do this, but I'm really excited about the Crown Act, because the Crown Act really does help to not only just shed a light on it, but also to give education. So for me, I think when we think about the reason that it would be that maybe your friend would have a challenge with you saying that I want locks, or that type of thing, would be because there are still so many people like myself with locks who get discriminated against, who aren't able to attend schools, who aren't able to wrestle in a wrestling match. When there was a story of a young man who had to have his hair cut by his teammates and his coaches because the judge wouldn't let him wrestle. And he won too. I was like, yes, honey, but it was so sad. And I won't lie, when I watched the video, I had a very visceral reaction to watching these people cut this child's hair so he could wrestle. It's ridiculous. He had a cap on. He would not, it's not like it was, if anything, it would have been a harder thing for him to manage, because he would have had, somebody would have had something to grab onto. Anyways.
That's what I was just thinking.
The discrimination piece is largely placed upon Black folks when it comes to just the way our hair grows out of our head. So that's where I see that lock kind of the locks aspect of it, and the braids and that type of thing, specific box braids and cornrows, those have a rich history that have helped Black Americans stay connected to where we came from, even though we don't necessarily know exactly where we came from. So there's still like learning, and there's still movement, and there's still growing. And there's a serious possibility that I will look back on this interview in 10 years and be like, Mahogany, wow, what have you learned since then? And I think that's the key to keep learning. But as far as why, like straightening, Black folks straightening their hair or wearing wigs and weaves and that type of thing that gives that straight look, why it is not cultural appropriation is because it was, I mean, again, we'll go back to that historical piece. When Black folks were brought to America, the first thing that happened was they had their head shaved. Their head shaved. And they said it was for cleanliness, but also that's a very dehumanizing thing if that's not something that you're choosing to do for yourself. Right? Yeah. So then, during slavery, there was a lot of rules placed upon what you looked like. And it wasn't because they wanted to just like make sure you were happy. It was like people started, slave owners started being judged based on how their enslaved people looked. So there were these more rules heaped upon these people to look a certain way. And then, during the Jim Crow era, when Black people were free here in the United States, it was, how do you get these jobs? And certain, most of the jobs that folks were trying to get at that time, to be fair, there was a lot of people doing a lot of really amazing things. And a lot of people just had to do certain things to survive. So they would have to go work in these white houses, right? And the people who were hiring them were looking for a certain thing. They were, again, taking on the identity of the person that they worked for. So they needed to have their hair smoother in order to gain access to jobs and money. And some people also, on the other side of it, some people were really just like, they wanted to be as far removed from slavery with the quote unquote nappy hair, right? Like they wanted to move past that and see themselves differently. And so the evolution of that really truly is, we were told to straighten our hair. Some people were told to straighten our hair because that's how we were going to be accepted. It was all about assimilation. There's beauty in that because, again, it took innovation to a whole new level in Black hair, which was really beautiful. But sometimes I think it would be really nice for Black folks, for me, to see innovation not out of necessity, but just out of like inspiration. And I think that, so when I see a beautiful silk press, I don't see someone trying to be white. I just see them like taking what was something that was expected of them to be presentable, and now it's something that just expresses a different aspect of their personality. Yeah,
cool, got it. Okay, wow, that's fantastic. I was just thinking of something that you told me last time we were talking, which just came back into my head, which is sort of related to what you're talking about now, and that is about a woman came into the salon and screamed out to you, "Do you braid, honey? Do you do braids?" Tell us about that.
You call me out for not knowing how to braid hair? That's so cool.
No, I think that's good. I mean, that's a really good example. I mean, again, I was thinking back to, again, in the 80s. I mean, I'm old, in the middle of the 80s, I went to two of us, we paid to go to a black salon in London. And there's these two white dudes turn up, and we're going into this black salon for a day to spend a day there with them. We paid to have a training there, and it was amazing. But like, I just walked away thinking it was a totally different world in terms of the hair. A lot of it were cornrows and chemical relaxer straight. It was just it was so foreign to how I worked and what I did. I was so full of appreciation for it. But you made me laugh when you said that you couldn't braid, because I can at least braid. But
well, listen, okay, hold on. I'm gonna go down here on the glass now.
You're losing your cred now.
Braid but I'm not. So like, there are so many gifted braiders. Like we have some really gifted braiders within our training team, like Nike Blount, watch out. Like I will watch her braid all day. But I think one of the challenges is like, for me, it was not something that I grew up with. And it's not something that we teach in school. I mean, when I went to beauty school, it's not something we were taught. We were taught how to do a French braid. We were taught how to do like an inside out braid, that type of thing. But it was always on really straight hair. It was all on really big hair. Like we never had that focus. And the only time that I ever really had the opportunity to learn anything having to do with Black folks' hair was from the other peers that I had in my class. Like the Tanisha was definitely she was a year or a class ahead of me. And so she was kind of my little mentor, and she was always on something. And so she taught me how to do a horizontal cornrow so that I could sew in a weave. Sure. But it's going to be covered up. Nobody's going to see it. It's like, it's going to be tight to do its job. It's not pretty. So like I can do that, and I can box braid. I mean, growing up, like you said, I definitely had a lot of challenges with my own hair for a lot of reasons. Not just like growing up with a white mom, but like truly just, I think, as I see my kids now, they're 12 and 15. So, there's just like hormones and life, and everybody has like those transitional years that are really tough. My transitional years showed up all over my hair. Like I was, that was just really, you could tell that was the happening thing for me, that was the thing that was tough for me. So in like seventh grade, was it seventh grade? Yeah. Seventh grade, middle school, right? Well, worst years. One of my friends finally just was like, girl, because I had been picked on about my hair for years, like dry, sad. I would try to have relaxers. And my mom's bestie totally went to classes. She did like you. She went to different Black salons throughout the Twin Cities to try to help learn about my hair. And so when Denise did my hair, it was beautiful. But when I had to do my hair, she didn't know how to teach me how to do my hair. So fast forward to seventh grade, and like I have a relaxer, but it's puffy and it's dry, and I don't know how to iron it properly. All of those things. And my friend Mila, she was like, let me get you together. Like, she's like, I want you to go to the beauty supply store. I want you to get this grease and Blue Magic. I want you to get this many packs of braiding hair, number 2, because you're not Black. You need, your hair is a little lighter, so you need a number 2. I want you to get this comb, this, and so she box braided my hair. Back in the day, we called them dookie braids, which is hilarious because they were big and thick. And it was like Janet Jackson from Poetic Justice. Like, it was awesome. I loved it. And it was the first time that I looked at myself and I was like, that's what I look like. This is what I want to look like. I had the salt and pepper haircut back before that. I had an afro. I had a jerry curl. I mean, I had every hair because I was trying to find myself. But when I first got my hair box braided, like that's when I saw myself as like a person that I wanted to see myself as, which I think is why I've ended up with locks for so long. But it was truly, and it was not just the hair, but it was like sitting on Mila's bed, having her like grease my scalp and like section out these beautiful sections. And she had like, there's sacred geometry going on here, because she had like the bottom half of my head was one length, but the top half of my head was longer, so that when I wore it up in a ponytail, because it was the late 80s, early 90s. So when I wore the half up, half down, it would all come to the same length. I was like, yes, Mila. So then she taught me how to braid my own hair. So that was something that was like, not only did I have a beautiful style, like Denise would give me beautiful styles, but Mila was able to teach me how to do my own hair. So she empowered me to like do that. And so I spent most of my teen years, going from braids to, twists to, all types of things. So I can do those things, but just don't ask me to do any like Fulani braids with the cute tightness. I got people for that. I got references for that.
I've got it. Okay. So it's interesting that, because, thinking back to my experience going into a Black salon 30 years ago, whatever it is, it was a different job. And so it sort of goes full circle now with what we were talking about at the beginning. Like anyone should, I walked out of that salon with an understanding that what I'd just witnessed was so completely different to where my skill sets were. It was like a totally different job. Do you know what I mean? Working with hair like that. Beautiful, but it was like, that's not what I'm been made for. Just like doing color wasn't what I've been made for. Doing bridal hair isn't what I've been made for, you know. But that's really interesting. I touched on this and I didn't really explain it. I said we'll get to it later. You keep saying the word locks, and
Yes.
you know, we had a little discussion before we, you know, came on this live, and I learned something that was really intriguing. So talk to us about that, about why you refer to them as locks.
Well, so for me, and again, this is me, right? Like I have a lot of Black friends who say dreadlocks and dreads. And I mean, it's definitely a personal thing. But I think one of the journeys over this last few years is I really like to learn the history behind hairstyles. Like that to me was huge. And I think that there's one particular book that shared a story about when the British colony were colonizing Jamaica. In particular, there were British soldiers who had who were calling the locks that the Jamaicans had dreadful. And so I think when you think about it like that, and also this was a long time ago, we can move past these things but for some people it is a trigger. And so I use locks because it doesn't, because for me, that's not triggering anyone. That to me is a very accurate representation. It is a lock. But also it takes some of the pain away, because I think that there are still pain points when we talk about, you know, I mean, there's just pain points for Black folks when it comes to our hair, because it has been so scrutinized. It has been so challenged over the years. And when we think about like our perspective, right? We went to beauty school, we learned these cuts, we did these things. And then, you know, if you were lucky enough to have a Tunisia in your world, you had like an access to a different way of styling, like working with a hot comb. I had never worked with a hot comb. I didn't have a Nana who did a hot comb, right? That was not me. That was not my life. So when I got to work with hot combs for the first time, I was like, ooh, but now I can hot comb anybody. Like it just took practice. And I think that it's that willingness and that love that we have for folks to not only learn the techniques, and then decide whether or not that's something you want to do in the salon. But if you learn it and you decide you don't want to do it, that's different than just being like, I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that. That doesn't pertain to me, because that is excluding not only people from your salon, but that's excluding like a whole thought process from your salon that actually could benefit you as a hairdresser. And I think that part of it too is, yes, technique, but there's that thoughtfulness and that mindfulness about the language that we use. Language matters. It really does. Like I used the term nappy earlier, and I actually kind of feel kind of terrible about it. Like it's a gross term. I mean, it's a term that like within Black folks, we can say these things, but like it is a term that I would not use under normal circumstances.
Well, there's a really good example that we both speak English, but nappy is not a word that we use. Do you know what a nappy is? It's a diaper.
A diaper. Yeah.
So we don't use the word diaper. Like that's an Americanism, diaper. We use the word nappy. So when you said it, I was like, I wonder what she means by that. Do you know what I mean? Right. But there was an interesting thing you said then. Well, there's lots of interesting things you said. And you said that dreadlocks is a trigger. It's a painful trigger. And that is what's so important with so much of the conversation, that not just that we're having, but the dialogue about Black hair, white hair, or Black and white people, etc., is that there are certain words that are maybe said completely innocently, like saying dreadlocks. Who would have thought? I would never, if you hadn't told me that in a million years, I would never have guessed that might have been a pain trigger. So thank you for enlightening me as to what the background of that is. We've been talking about this all the time. But we haven't even sort of got to the bit that I was going to talk about, which is, you know, you call yourself a hair historian and activist. And I suppose you've been being a hair historian and activist for the last 30 minutes, because we've just jumped straight in the deep end talking about all this stuff, which is great. It's fantastic. I'm loving the conversation. Can I ask you, do you ever get, well, first of all, do you ever get tired of talking about race? And secondly, what does a hair historian and activist even mean?
Okay. So to answer your first question, absolutely. I mean, but that is also the place that I've put myself in. It is something that is important to me because I feel like there are lots of different perspectives out there. And I think that that's one of the things that I think is really important when we're talking about race is that like Black people are not a monolith, right? Like we are all different. We are just as, there is not like a meeting where we all get together and we all decide like what we all think, what we all feel, how we are. Like that is not real. And I think you laugh, but I swear that is like how, especially in education, when you are learning about something new and you have preconceived notions, people will ask a lot of questions that might be, like you said, completely innocent in their ignorance, but it could be a trigger or a pain point for someone. So for me, when I'm in an education space, I don't get tired of talking about it. When I'm in an education space, I know that this is why I'm here. This is what it is. But finding that boundary and placing it, like if we're at dinner and you want to talk about that, I may tell you I'm not ready to talk about that. And that's for me to decide, right? So that part is and people need to be able to say, oh, right on, thank you, because it does take a lot of emotional labor. It does take a lot of like excess energy to put forth that type of conversation. And I love that it comes in all the different ways. Like it can be light, it can be fun, it can be interesting, and a lot of that has to do with how it's delivered, but also how it's received. So like if there's like with us, we've got this back and forth and it's really beautiful, but sometimes, people are different, like they just deliver it in different ways. And like, I personally love super direct. Like when I need to learn something, I love when people are very direct with me. Like, Mahogany, that's not it. Let's look at it this way. And you're like, oh, okay, thank you. And it's that thank you that I feel like, you were saying about your friend, the fact that she actually will say those, like will talk to you about that means that she cares about the friendship, right? Like if she didn't care about the friendship, she wouldn't tell you. She'd be like, oh, cool. Bye, Antony. Like, you know what I mean? Because that's what I would do. If I didn't care about the friendship, I'd be like, whatever, bye. That's just your opinion. And you can go on, be stupid, and somebody else can teach you that lesson. But so in the race aspect, that's where it comes from. And part of the reason that has become part of my identity as a hairdresser is because I really, I think a lot of us built up some new hobbies during the various shutdowns throughout the world over a COVID. But mine was really tied into what we were doing, because immediately Paul Mitchell started doing like videos because we were on lockdown, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted to like break out of like the traditional cuts and colors that I had been sharing, and so for me, it was something like, what are we now interested in? What's new and exciting? What's interesting? And for me, I always like to go back no matter what I'm doing. I like to like see, I'm very inspired by my grandparents who were, restaurateurs who totally owned restaurants and they worked really hard. So I always look back to them as like a reference for myself moving forward. Like, what am I into? So I started reading a lot more about texture. I started reading and watching videos, but I started reading about the history behind Black people and our hair, because again, when you don't grow up with something, you lose access to it. And for me, it was really important to gain that access, because I had recognized during that time, as a lot of us have, that there was some anti-Blackness in the way that I was doing my life, right? Like, and so when I started to read and grow and expand, it was something that was hard, but also I wanted to be able to share it because I felt so much better as I was moving through it. I realized that I was doing harm in ways that I didn't mean to. So, but who cares? If you mean to, intent versus, plans, it can just be really different. So for me, learning about the history, understanding, not just we began at slavery, but like where that hair came from, like, the different tribes in Africa all through, specifically like West Africa. I think I'm not going to say all of Africa, but specifically through West Africa, there were so many like shapes and styles that not just denoted like what tribe you were from, but also like who you were in the tribe. Like when you were ready to get married, you know, if you were in mourning, what your age group was, like who you were in the tribe. Like it really helped you to be a visual representation of who you were. And that you can see that so much now in Black culture. You can see just like, I mean, definitely like I'm a hippie Black girl. Like that's exactly what I am. I'm like a goofy hippie Black girl. You can tell by the way that I look. But then you can like look at John Mosley, right? Our artistic director for Paul Mitchell. Like that dude is not a hippie, right? Like because you see the way that he rolls, you see the way that he expresses himself through his hair. So I think that it's so beautiful that we still like culturally have that. And it's so wonderful to see where it comes from. And so that piece is why I started doing the hair historian.
Was I forget the exact words you used, but you were sort of giving me the feeling that you were saying that you said something about I'm doing harm to my Blackness or something. I forget how you said it, but it made me think that are you saying that you're sort of caught in between because you have a white mom? So are you Black or are you white? You're sort of caught in the middle of these two things, and that sometimes your identity goes, you know, hey girl, you know, who are you? What are you? You're selling yourself out here. Do you know where I'm coming from?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the challenges that a lot of like folks like myself who are multiracial, like we do, you know, we have a lot of questions and nuance, and not everybody, you know, like some people have like totally balanced and beautiful relationships with both sides of their family, and they get to enjoy all the culture, and that's awesome. And also, which is what I'm trying to do with my family now. And also, we can do harm with our ignorance, right? Like we can take our own experience of not knowing, and we can do harm to our Black family, our Black counterparts, by placing all of the emphasis on who we are and our confusion and our, you know, not understanding, and taking away from the real harm that is done to Black people, the deep scrutinization of their hair, deep scrutinization of their life. And that piece that's what I mean by doing harm, by, you know, not recognizing our own, you know, multiracial privilege. Like, yes, I grew up Black for sure. And yes, I was followed in stores and all of the things, but I had access to a lot of different things because people would allow my mom into spaces and she could bring me with, right? Like, so I have a lot of privilege in that. And so what I recognized was that I hadn't been using my privilege to uplift Black people. I had just been kind of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. And so it was hard for me to like recognize that. But now I have, and again, like I said, I'm gonna learn from this for sure. Like I will probably rewatch this in a couple of years and be like, huh, yeah, okay, wow, Mahogany, that was ignorant. Cool. But
me too. I'll probably watch it in half an hour and think the same about me.
Right. But that's evolution. And so the opportunity that I have now to like uplift, you know, Black stylists and Black educators, to, you know, support them, to shout their names from the rooftop, because I think a lot of times when we, you know, one of the challenges that I've seen was specifically within our industry is, you know, we have a lot of people who are like, I can do any texture now. Like, that's the new thing. Like I can do any texture. But then you also don't see that equity in like the education, for example, right? Like you don't see a lot of, we are starting to see more Black educators, but like, why didn't we see them before? Excuse me. Like where, and why are you only asking Black educators to do Black hair? Like Naima Lafont, one of my very favorite stylists in the whole wide world. And she is so well-versed in all hair, and she shows it in her portfolio. And that is so important. Paula Peralta, you know, she is a, you know, a gifted hairstylist. And I think it's really wonderful to see her being celebrated in these beautiful ways, because it's it's not just like her work with black hair. It's that she's just a really great hairdresser. And I think when we start to look at, a bigger balance, and we start to see more people like Regine Valsine, when we start to see Angelica Thomas, when we start to see these really incredible, people, Corey Bacon, Larry, James, like all of these people are so talented. And it's so wonderful when you see people like John and Paula, who are artistic directors, pulling them up and putting them forward to create like more, right? Like we're always looking for new and trends and this and that, but it comes from different perspectives. And if we are always looking at the same people for different perspectives, we're always going to get the same answers. So I love that we're expanding a little bit more to see how we can reach and touch everybody instead of, just one note.
Got it. I know we're running out of time, which is a shame because I'm loving this conversation, but one of the things I wanted you to talk is not even really a direct question. It's just sort of an observation. You touched on, you were talking about, I think you're talking about hot combs and stuff. And you said something about, I didn't have a nan that did that. I didn't grow up like that. And then you were talking about your friend and you said something about, and she sat me down on the bed and we did this, that, and the other to your hair, and there's a different sort of, what am I trying to say? It's sort of less about the salon. There's a real tradition about doing hair, a family thing, a growing up thing. Your mum does your hair, like just as much as when you talk about the black barbershop. I mean, I love the black barbershop, the culture that is in the black barbershop. It ain't just the barbershop. It's a whole nother thing. And I'm not just talking about what you see in the movies. It has a different energy and culture and like literally a different purpose to it. And as I said, when you were talking about your experiences of I couldn't help but picking up on that. Just talk to us about that for a minute, and then I want to touch on some stuff about products.
Absolutely. I think that, like I said, I didn't have a Nana to do my hair that way. My mom did not have, the same skill set, but like, bless her heart, she did learn how to cornrow. And I mean, she did her darndest. I'm gonna give her that. But it was also the 80s and girls weren't really wearing cornrows at that time the same way, at least here in Minnesota. So like I got made fun of. Like it is what it is. And I think that tradition of growing up and having that hair knowledge is really special. And it also like helps you to know, like to get to know yourself in a different way. So I think it speaks to like that, like, I think it makes sense that I didn't really see myself very clearly until I had an experience like that with my friend braiding my hair and like giving me this like moment of like culture that I had not, like I grew up in a very, very white culture. I mean, I'm in Minnesota. We're Scandinavian and German up here. We're starting to get a lot more different types of people, but it's still true. I mean, it's still very white focused. And I think that, those places can be really special because they really help to shape your identity and shape how you view the world and shape how you view yourself. But I also think that there is so much as we move forward, I think it's not even just necessarily about like biracial people or multi-ethnic people. I think we are just like living closer together. Like the population is growing. So we do have, like Vietnamese neighbors next to, Ghanaian neighbors next to, Cambodian neighbors next to, Puerto Rican neighbors. And so I think that piece of it, like we are influencing each other on these really beautiful levels. And I think that when we allow that influence to like really flourish, that's where we're going to see the innovation from inspiration in the future. Like that's when we start to see those perspectives as valid and beautiful, because maybe somebody did grow up in a salon or not in a salon world, but like grew up doing hair. They have value. Their value is because they've been braiding since they were 12, or since they were 5 or since they were 6. Like my friends Dre and Marla, they've been braiding since they were tiny,
Yeah.
which is why they are incredibly talented.
Yeah.
Incredibly.
I suppose the thing I wanted to get at was that it's you said it. You said it was a cultural moment that you'd never had. And that is what, like, there is an equivalent for white people like that. I don't think there is. It's like, it's not a cultural moment going to a salon or your mum doing cutting your bangs in the kitchen or whatever.
But maybe there is. But maybe there is.
Maybe.
Like, think about it. Like, so for example, like I would go to my grandma, like when I would go to my grandma's salons, like I would take her to the salon so she would get her hair done once a week, right? So you get her little roller set on and be cute and like sit under the hood dryer and then get it picked out. And then she started bringing my mom to the salon, right? Like that's that. Like, so she would get her hair done once a week. Then she started bringing my mom to the salon. And so it's like, it's almost like a familial experience, right? So in that way, she had the opportunity to show her like something, about grooming, show her something about expressing herself. Like, this is what the ladies do. And I mean, again, this was like in the 50s. So, like, so there, this is what ladies do.
You weren't even alive in the 50s.
Right. But like, I got a lot of stories from my Nana and my mama. And so like, it's that cultural aspect, right? Like that may not be a white people culture, but it is definitely like a culture that you see like in that family dynamic where like, I know that, so my kids don't have to go anywhere to get their hair done, but like if they did, their dad would probably take them to the barber shop, right? That's like that's where they would go. And so I think that it's beautiful because there's like really amazing commonalities through all the cultures in like, how do you know where to go? Well, you go where your mom went, and then you find out maybe that's not the right place for you, but then you start to find other places as you move through your life. Or you went to the barbershop with your dad. That's how you got that cultural aspect. And to me, when I see like the commonalities are so much larger and more important than the differences, but the differences have a bigger impact when they are done without mindfulness, right? Like those differences when we are not thoughtful and mindful about how we carry them out or how we dissect them, how we move forward with them, like just language, right? Like, you were saying, talking about products, like I love working with a multitude of different products that sometimes people are not necessarily, they're like, that's not a Black product. Well,
that's what I wanted to ask you, just, as we start to wrap up, is how different I was always under the impression that Black hair had different products. You mentioned something. You said blue something or other, some
blue magic,
wax, blue magic. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a typical example of like that ain't no Paul Mitchell product.
No,
blue magic.
No.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, so that's what I'm trying to get to. There is how different are Black hair products. And because I know that you love Paul Mitchell products and you use all Paul Mitchell products doing Black hair. So I was a bit surprised that, what's the right, I'm not going to say that those products work on Black hair. Of course they work on Black hair, but I was a bit surprised that they are your go-to product because they don't only work, they work brilliantly on Black hair. I mean, obviously, like any range of products, there's some pomades and stuff I'd use on my hair. There's some I would never use on my hair. So just talk to us about that before we have to wrap up.
Antony, you said it. That's exactly it. We don't make products for skin color. We make products for hair types. Like that's how that is. That's just like what we do. That's what, like hairdressers, we curate our products around the guests that sit in our chair, right? So for me, I have a lot of fine haired guests with curly to coily hair. And so for me, Paul Mitchell works really well. Certain products work really well because it's like, I need the right tool to execute the right, look. So for me, there aren't necessarily, and yes, there are, I'm not going to lie and be like, there aren't Black hair care products versus white hair care products versus blah, 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 which I also think is kind of crazy that we say like black and white when there's like literally hundreds of thousands of other cultures around that, but it's just black and white. But I think when we stop looking at the skin tone, like the skin tone, And the ethnicity comes into play in how we deliver, how we create, how we, imbibe how we vibe in the culture of our salon. That's where that matters. Like, what images do you have up in your salon? Do they welcome like people of different cultures? That type of stuff is where like the language that you use, the selection of products that you have is not really, the language you use is important. The selection of products that you have, if you know how to use them and you know the why behind it, and you understand like why this texture is going to need a little bit heavier muscle product in order to get the look that we're going for, whether it's a twist out, a silk press, or box braids. If you have the right products, you can do those. If you understand how to use the products properly, specifically on the texture and the formation that you're working with. I think for a long time too, we've had, the natural hair community, and no shade on the natural hair community, but like the natural hair community came from just like a lot of like consumers, right? Like that's where co-washes came from. It was because consumers were using conditioner rather than shampoo, because that shampoo was like really stripping all of the oil out of their hair. So they started using conditioner to cleanse their hair, and their, curls were smoother and everything was more moisturized. But still, P.S. if you're using co-washes, my friends, please, 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 once a month at least clarify that hair. Just, that's my little PSA. And just please clarify your hair. Your scalp needs you. Scalp health is really important. But truly, I think that, products are just tools for us to play with the hair, right? That's what they are, tools for us to play with the hair. And if you know what your products can do and what they can't do, you wouldn't ask a tissue to do a sponge's job, right? It just wouldn't work. You'd be asking it to do something that it was not capable of. And vice versa. If you try, you could do it, but it might be a little too extra. So knowing how to work, knowing what those products work best on, and knowing what that hair type you're working on is, what the texture is, what the goal is, what the formation is, that is far more important to me when I'm working with products than whether or not I bought it, specifically for Black people or specifically for literally anybody else.
Yeah, got it. Okay. This has been fantastic. I had a whole list of things. We were going to talk about salon suites. We were going to talk about commission salon. We were going to talk about all sorts of stuff. But I've loved what we've been talking about. It's been fantastic. I've learned so much, and it'll be really interesting to see what our audience have got to say and what input they've got. So, Mahogany, I just want to say thank you so much for being so open and honest and what's the word with me? Tolerant. Because it's important. It's so good to have these conversations and to sort of broaden your perspective and understanding of the history of everything, because I loved hearing all that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And honestly, Antony, thank you for being open to receive it, because it's one thing to like be able to deliver it. But I think a lot of times when we are hearing things that can be triggering or that can be like, I didn't know, like we can be really, no matter what the topic is, we can kind of close down a little bit. So I wanted to thank you for being super open to like receiving it, because that's just as important as like, being honest about it.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have to get together another time to talk about all these other things.
Absolutely.
So until then, Mahogany Plautz, so nice to have this opportunity to talk to you one more time. Okay.
Thanks,
all right.
Anthony.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to connect with us, you'll find us at growmysalonbusiness.com or on Facebook and Instagram at growmysalonbusiness. And if you enjoyed tuning into our podcast, make sure that you subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Until next time, this is Antony Whitaker, wishing you continued success.